Thank you for joining us today. We're excited to share how Infoblox DNS Traffic Control can deliver high-value DNS-based global server load balancing to keep your network and your applications available and running while delivering network visibility, all from a central console and at significantly lower cost today. So Scott, let's dig in. You know, we live in an on-demand world. Networks and apps are being asked to do more and more, connecting to devices, handling ever increasing IoT endpoints, automating, working across geographies and in the hybrid cloud, and not to mention fending off attacks from bad actors. And this, 'tis the season, right? It seems like with the announcement earlier on Quora and on Marriott, there are lots of bad actors out there that we need to be aware of. And then, of course, there are privacy developments in play. Many of us have heard of the GDPR, the General Data Privacy Requirement that went into effect in May in Europe. And so systems have to be enabled for data privacy and protection and business continuity. And but inevitably, right, some are going to fail. And when they do, it's a fairly substantial impact. And so we can address a number of these questions. And so why don't we go ahead and move into our agenda. Today we're going to talk to you about some key IT initiatives around load balancing, some of the challenges and trends. We're also going to overview the DTC solution, talk about its value and architecture. We'll do a little bit deeper look into some of the features and use cases. And then Scott is going to walk us through a demo today. We'll also have a couple of customer case studies and then wrap up and do some Q&A. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of the initiatives. You know, visibility is one of the key issues. The ability to discover and see real-time health and status of your topologies and pools and servers all from a single console is important. Being able to monitor and see DNS and GSLB servers on the subnet, GeoIP, and IPAM is absolutely important too. The ability to do reporting, to get automated updates through dashboards and reports, and being able to look through the variety of analytics are important. And then sharing data out, especially actionable threat data, that's absolutely important as well. But Scott, there are some challenges, right? I mean, there are some things that get in the way of getting to that ideal experience.
Yeah, and you know, some of the challenges people are seeing around these is you know, not knowing what's really in their environment and not having any sort of correlation between things like DNS, DHCP, and IPAM. And you know, they have dashboards and a lot of people will have like stats or have logs, but really don't really know what's going on in the environment, or they're just sending stats to a Splunk and hoping the Splunk has some kind of reporting around it, but no real true visibility into the environment. Same with RPZ, right? Being able to not have true cyber intelligence data.
Yeah, those are challenges for sure. Really though, load balancing, right, Scott, is about uptime, right? It's about 5 nines, 24/7, 365 availability for intranet and internet apps. And to be able to have those apps performing, they have to be fast, they have to be able to be routed to the right server, they have to be able to scale during heavy peaks, loads of traffic. You have to be able to validate servers and really trouble check to see if there's any issues going on in the pathway. And then, of course, disaster recovery. If something does happen, you want to be able to keep your apps up and running or quickly be able to restore those. But a lot of companies face additional challenges. Can you address some of those?
Yeah, you know, a lot of the issue people are seeing is being able to deal with disasters and being able to handle what happens if I lose a data center. You know, I live in Texas and we deal with hurricanes, and you know, a lot of people on the coast want to be able to ensure that if there's applications there that they have disaster recovery to another site, or even in times of peak load, being able to, most people aren't able to get data to the most properly performing server at the time.
Yeah, and so, that can have impacts for sure. And then, of course, in the area of automation, once you're able to see everything, once you know that it's up and running, you want to make sure that it's easy to manage, and automation plays a big part of that. Manageability has to do with, fast and accurate global server load balancing. You want to be able to quickly deploy. You want to be able to quickly provision your apps and do it with a simple UI. The API automation is also a key factor that a lot of companies are looking for, because it gives them the ability to do it all in a simple API call. And so perhaps you can chat with us about that a little bit later. But then there's also traffic control in terms of getting to the right geodiverse servers. Maybe there's some in EMEA, maybe there's some in Asia Pac. And so you want to make sure to be able to balance that. And then, of course, getting software updates out quickly, but still companies face a number of challenges.
Yeah, the biggest challenge is around manageability and around being able to make changes to the environment quickly and be able to do things like update software on multiple appliances all in one. So we'll get to that in a little bit. Hopefully, we've got a bunch of Infoblox existing customers on here and know the ease of use and the ease of management of upgrading a grid or using our API.
So Scott, there are some trends that we've all kind of noticed. One is everyone's become really dependent on e-commerce, whether it's intranet or internet. It is an essential business tool because it really drives brand awareness, operations, and revenue. Another thing that we've all experienced is, the increasing amounts of network traffic volumes. They're all rising dramatically. It makes it really difficult for those that are on the call today because you have constrained IT resources, and pretty soon it's become, you have to do more and more with less and less until you have to do everything with virtually nothing, right? And so that is really a challenge. And then, of course, the applications themselves are becoming more and more complex. People want things real time, and even a momentary or marginal amount of latency presents a substantial risk, because people, if they don't get what they're looking for immediately from your site, they'll go somewhere else, and there's plenty of sites out there. So and the other challenge is cloud deployment models are becoming more and more commonplace. Companies are centralizing their data centers, but the big challenge is that you have more and more users becoming more mobile and global and going elsewhere across the globe, and there's also lots more of offshoring that's happening, and so our users are becoming even more decentralized. And we mentioned, GDPR, there's mounting regulations. If you don't pay attention to those, there's some substantial adverse business and financial impacts if you don't comply. So there's those things to consider, and these things all kind of fit in with global server load balancing. And then, of course, we've talked about DNS-based attacks. It seems like the hackers are really moving to more dangerous threat landscapes. There's an alarming increase in highly elusive application layer attacks, and we're all kind of feeling this and seeing this through the media. So these are some of the trends that we're seeing in load balancing right now, and one of the reasons why today we really want to share the DTC story with you. So let's talk a little bit about the DTC overview. Scott, what is it? How does it work? What's in it for those that are on the call today?
Yeah, so Bob, what we've found is that most companies, they want to be able to intelligently deliver applications, and they might be internal applications, they might be externally facing, but they want to be able to deliver those and make it make it about having it a more dynamic environment, right? So what Infoblox has done is we've taken the complex world of GSLB, global server load balancing, and being able to take that functionality but meld it with the ease of use and the visibility and the security ecosystem of our Infoblox Grid, right? And DTC makes it easy to move from a static environment, more of a one-to-one name to IP mapping that most people traditionally know about DNS, and making it more of a dynamic one where maybe instead of a single IP, you respond with multiple IPs. And it could be based on where the user is, what subnet or what geolocation, or even IPAM data in your database. And jump to the next slide. The other thing is that there's a lot of competitors out in the world, right, that are doing GSLB, but they're a lot of them are 5 times the cost of our product, but really don't offer a lot of the features even that we offer, right? There's products out there that do certain parts of GSLB, but we cover kind of everything, and we completely integrate it with all of our grid and all of our IPAM data. So yeah, 90% functionality at 20% the cost, and I think that's even doing us a disservice.
Yeah. Great point. So, it's all really about a better value, right? And giving customers a better experience. If you have slow apps, people are going to get frustrated. You're going to get fast complaints to the NOC. One of the things that we see, right, Scott, is that DTC really gives you a better user experience, but it also delivers the performance that you perhaps expect from a global server load balancer.
Yeah, and being able to intelligently feed IPAM data into the GSLB, and being able to and we're going to drill into the GDPR use case, but being able to respond to to users based on where they are, and being able to keep them in a certain geo is pretty important to people. And also,
sorry, Scott. Go ahead.
And also being able to check the health of those servers, right, and know that the servers are available, and like I mentioned earlier, make sure that you're using the most optimal server.
Exactly, and Scott, you mentioned just a moment ago that some of the other application delivery controllers that are out there, are more expensive, and one of the things that is caused by that is that you have to use perhaps more servers, more hardware, and that those costs can be avoided, and especially trying to manage those. More labor requires more operating expense, and DTC specifically is focused on reducing the cost of acquisition as well as the overall cost of ownership and operating. What are some thoughts that you have about that, Scott?
Yeah, that's the beauty of every meeting we have when we talk about DTC, including this, is kind of explaining that it's easy to deploy, it's easy to license. In my past, I worked at a load balancing company, probably one of the biggest ones in the world. And, their products aren't cheap, and their products aren't easy to license. And with us, you can do a 60-day evaluation and, integrate all that functionality into the grid that you already have. So it's just really just turning the functionality on and being able to use it in our UI.
And Scott, we're really not saying that, people that might have another load balancer, for example, would have to tear that out, right? I mean, certainly DTC can be added to handle some of the, the other types of functionality, and so it really enhances the value of what you already have.
Exactly.
So Scott, this slide gives a little bit of an overview on the architecture. Again, we're focusing on cost efficiency. We're talking about quick deployment of licenses, our IPAM integration, the centralized management, the database that scales and can update with quick upgrades and so on, high availability, survivability, and the Microsoft management integration as well. Can you walk us through this diagram a little bit and show us how this is deployed?
Yeah, so hopefully everybody that's on this call is pretty familiar with Infoblox and our grid. When we sell deals, when we sell these products, we put together a design for everybody, and we kind of show where everything lives. So we always start with the grid master. That's this right in the center, and that's the centralized database and the centralized UI, and the all your API calls are going to that. The the grid master can also sync data from Microsoft DNS if we want, and DHCP. And then we've got a bunch of grid members here, and we've got one here and one here, and these members can do all sorts of things, whether it's our reporting or whether it's doing discovery. In a typical environment, it looks like this. We've got reporting, grid master, maybe a grid master candidate at a DR site for backup. Maybe we've got a public cloud up here, but most people it's this kind of environment, and you're running DNS and DHCP on some of these members, and so the functionality is there. You really just need to enable the DTC license on the members that you want to do GSLB for. So for instance, you would turn it on this guy and this guy, but then leave all the other ones not licensed unless you needed to. So it's extremely flexible. It's extremely easy to integrate and to test out and to start using in your environment.
So Scott, a moment ago we talked about some of the other application delivery controllers that are out there. There's some traditional ones, and then there's also Infoblox. Let's just do a quick comparison so folks can really get a sense, right? So can you walk us through what you found in terms of the traditional ADCs?
Yeah, so traditionally, DNS has been an afterthought to most traditional layer 2, layer 3 load balancers. They were built to do load balancing and added DNS functionality after the fact. They typically don't have insight into a lot of the connections. They also only use basic network info, and they're not using any IPAM data. So they're only using subnet or geolocation. Most of them typically don't have any integrated reporting. So you got to send data off to a SIM or some other reporting utility. And they sell RPZ, but they don't have feeds. We've got 26 different cyber intelligence feeds in our security products. The API is definitely pretty limited, and they don't have the ability to upgrade an entire grid over your lunch break. DTC, on the other hand, was built from the ground up on our mature grid architecture, and everybody's familiar with our grid, and being able to use dynamic IPAM info to make load balancing decisions. Things like reporting and security and a full-featured API, those are part of every grid. Being able to sync to your cloud, and being able to pull all this different data from Microsoft and correlate it together. Being able to use our threat feeds, and I mentioned I guess it's 30 now. We have 30 threat feeds, and then again, 4-click software update to update an entire grid, right? You download the thing, you run a couple commands, and you can even schedule those to run overnight, and it's done.
Yeah, I mean, so the distinctions are really pretty substantial here. Let's talk, Scott, around the algorithms, right? Because we do a lot of the ones that the higher price guys do, but some of the core we find are right here: round robin ratio, topology, global availability. Can you just touch on these quickly?
Yeah, so this is what we would consider part of the 90% functionality, right? These are a lot of the table stakes things that all the guys are bringing to the table. Being able to do global availability, where everything goes to one server or one data center or one geo, based on where the if it's a DR scenario. So if everything goes to site A until it fails, and then you roll over to site B. Some people like to do topology based, where you're doing it based on your geo or based on your network. And some people just like to do round robin, pretty simple load balancing.
And then Scott, we also have health monitors as well, and there's a whole variety of them, right, that DTC uses.
There are, and we've been adding to this, and we've been building this up over the last couple of years. So, for folks that are on this call that are running DTC that might have an older version of software on your grid, make sure to get that thing updated, because we've added functionality such as in the HTTPS monitor. You can do certificate checks, and you can even put in a username and password, and you can look for certain responses coming back from the server, so you know that that's the most optimal and healthy server, not just doing a standard TCP check. So so there's a bunch of different ways to check the server's health. SNMP, we'll get into the SNMP one in a little bit, but that's a pretty new one as well.
And Scott, one of the other things that you brought up was the reporting and analytics. This slide actually speaks to one of the reports that's canned and really available if someone's interested in our free reporting tier. They can take a look at all of the reports. We actually have over 100 dashboards and reports. This one, Scott, really just pinpoints a trend of abnormal traffic and perhaps the impacts on performance that might bring. Can you give us some more insights on this one?
Yeah, being able to understand sort of where your traffic patterns are, and being able to make sure that you're using the most optimal server, and being able to see the trend overall of where traffic is going and being distributed. And Bob, like you mentioned, if we have a free version of our reporting software, so hopefully everybody on this call is running reporting, or as soon as they're done here is going to get a hold of your account team and find out how to get a license for that, because this is a great product and a great feature of the Grid.
Well, and everyone has so much wealth of data, right, that they're sitting on top of their networks. And the question is, are you really getting access to that, right? Are you really using it and putting it to your advantage? I mean, we have pre-engineered, customizable reports and dashboards that can really give you a comprehensive view, again, from a single platform. And so that's a real advantage. Scott, let's talk a little more now about some of the features that we've recently released. This one, you just mentioned SNMP, but we also have round-trip delay. Can you walk through this one for us?
Yeah, so these are essentially checking the actual health of the server. So, the round-trip delay is us checking how fast the response is going to be from the server to where the traffic's coming from. So then we can kind of measure, is the path most optimal one way or the other. The SNMP is actually doing SNMP polling of the servers itself to look at CPU or memory or number of connections, and you can stagger a bunch of these monitors and look at things and go, I want to take these two things into account. And the SNMP one is really nice because a lot of times the health of the server is indicative based on the CPU and memory utilization. So using those and then determining which server we're going to use is a real proactive way to monitor those servers.
And the other thing, Scott, is, loads are going to vary through the day, right? And so that's another reason why you'd want to have this capability, because the static configs that are out there don't respond to network changes that well, right? So this really gives you some insight about response times and helps you to kind of reduce those costs associated with automating responses. So this next one is about a multi-tier health check support. And so, the use case here is detecting if an app is unavailable to avoid sending traffic. You don't want to send traffic to somewhere where there's an impaired upstream server, right, Scott?
Yeah, and what we've found is that only monitoring the health of the web server doesn't take into account the entire tier. So if you've got a healthy web server and we're getting a TCP response from the web server, but the user can't log in because maybe the database server is down, then that doesn't do them much good. So we added the functionality to be able to monitor all those tiers and say, if these things aren't all passing, then we're going to consider that tier as down and not use it.
So this next one, state persistence. Scott, you want to just touch on this one quickly?
Yeah. So being able to keep people persistent to the same location is important for today's modern applications. So we've had the functionality of you can set persistence for that user to that site, but the persistence has never been synced across multiple grid members. So we added the functionality to be able to have that as a global setting.
And then there's another one. This is a pretty helpful one, right? The SRV record support.
Yeah, and I mentioned earlier on the call after the poll that we've got a bunch of videos on our tech forum or tech videos area on community, and one of them is using SRV records to be able to give the best response to non-Windows clients, the best location of a domain controller, right? Because with a Windows client, the service record will tell the user where to go, but for non-Windows clients, they generally don't get good load balancing. So this gives you a way of being able to determine where the user is. So yeah, there's a video on the user community around Active Directory site location.
And Scott, there's also that same video is actually out on the Infoblox YouTube channel as well. So you can just look out there for the SRV record support from Infoblox. Another one that's a major one is CSV import and export, and the use case around that is involving migrating, right, and being able to import and export DNS data, especially into Infoblox from other tools. Scott, what thoughts do you have on this one?
Yeah, so this is a tool that I'm guessing pretty much everybody on this call has used, the CSV Job Manager, and being able to import and modify DNS data. We were limited before in that functionality was only in DS in general, and we didn't have it just around DTC. So now we've got the ability to do a mass import of a bunch of servers, pools, and LBDNs. And those are the things we're going to talk about in the demo. Being able to mass import a bunch of things instead of having to point and click or having to write your own API file.
And Scott, one thing to notice here, it's pretty tough to see on this graphic, but this is not just add, merge, and delete, right? We also have the ability to override and do some customization as well.
Yeah, it's a pretty powerful tool, and like I said, I'm guessing pretty much everybody on this call has used it at least once.
This next one is pretty significant, especially for any of those federal government or state and local government customers that are on the call. DTC works actually on multiple FedRAMP infrastructure clouds, so AWS GovCloud and Azure Government. This is important because it just reiterates Infoblox's commitment to NIOS, Network Insight Operating System. We are committed to that. Infoblox is really also dedicated to the security standards that are required across the various hierarchies of government. And so we've operated actually in GovCloud since 2016. We've also been certified for Azure Government. We passed the FIPS 140-2 requirements. We're awaiting kind of official announcement from NIST. Common Criteria has also been certified since NIOS 7.1, and we redo that with each major release. And then, of course, anyone familiar with DISA, that's the Defense Information Systems Agency, they have a approved products list, and we are on that for DoD infrastructure. So again, for enterprise customers, the thing to know here is that we're meeting the high standards and guidelines that are required at the federal level, and so you can be confident as we go forward that we're meeting those requirements that also extend to local businesses as well and enterprises. Another thing to take into account here is just as we look across DTC, there are a number of use cases, right, Scott, that DTC actually can be used to help customers. And so, Scott, could you just give us a little bit of a insight on these as well?
Yeah, there's a lot of use cases around the way to kind of deploy and use DTC, whether it's a DR strategy, if it's both internal and external applications. We'll talk a little bit about GDPR in a minute. That's a really good use case. as well as using the CNAME functionality we added. We added CNAME support in our last version, and being able to use that to do tiers of application deployment. So we'll get into that in just a minute as well.
Right. Well, let's go ahead and actually talk about GDPR.
Yeah, so with using a use case like GDPR, it allows us to either deploy a pool into a single pool, and that single pool could be across geos, or it could be across multiple pools, and you might have one pool in Europe that requires GDPR compliance, and then maybe you have other pools in America and Asia, and the beauty is you can split the load kind of however you want. So maybe everybody that is in Europe for a GDPR based application needs to go to a server in Europe, but everywhere else maybe you can round robin between Americas and Asia. So pretty flexible in how you want to deploy it and where you want those servers to live.
Exactly. Another key use case, right, Scott, is around CNAME for scalability.
Yeah, and from the last example, right, having multiple pools, in different regions, and then you can split those regions up into maybe East and West. And under West, pool 1 might be in California, and pool 2 might be in Washington, and then the East one, maybe pool 4 is in DC or something. So being able to take an application and then based on using CNAME, split that application off into multiple geos and then have full control over where your traffic's going to go.
Hey, Scott, coming up next, we want to jump into the demo, but before we do, we did have a question from Sean Hoover. He asked, and this was for a few minutes ago, but he said, for the HTTP monitor, can a post HTTP method be used, or is it only limited to a GET?
Yeah, so I was looking at that, and I'm pretty sure it's only limited to a GET. I don't think we have the ability to make any changes. It's really just for being able to check the health of the server, not make any changes to it.
All right, so Scott, you're going to give us a little bit of an overview on the demo here. Let's go ahead and see before we jump into that. Let's see if I can.
So while Bob starts that, what we're going to do is we're going to walk through configuring DTC from scratch, and we're going to start with the servers, and those might be the actual servers. Those might be a VIP on a load balancer. And then from there, we're going to go ahead and start it, Bob. From there, we're going to set up a pool. We're going to add those servers to a pool, and then we're going to set up an LBDN. In my example, I'm using an extensible attribute called town. And in that town, I have two different values. One is town of Dallas, because I live in Dallas. And two is in Paris. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to build the 3 servers. As this thing loads. I'm going to start setting up the 3 servers. And I'm setting them up as www 1, 2, and 3. And the IPs are going to be 101, 102, and 103. Here I'm setting up the extensible attribute. So for these 3 servers, I'm going to hit town, and then I'm going to do value of Dallas. And then in the magic of QuickTime editing, it's going to have me have built all 3 servers, and then the 4th one in Paris. So a little editing magic. So now I've got my 4 servers. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a pool. Again, I'm going to have one pool called Dallas pool and one pool called Paris pool. When I start walking through the pool, the wizard configuration. This thing goes so slow. It's pretty straightforward. Anybody who's used our products has seen our wizard and know what things you got to select. So here I'm selecting the monitor. I'm using the SNMP monitor to check the CPU utilization of my server. But again, you can use multiple, and you can stagger them. On the pool, I'm selecting the load balancing method. I'm using round robin for my example, but we've got global availability, we've got ratio, which is like weighted round robin, and then we've also got topology, which we'll set up kind of at the end of the demo. So for here, I'm going to select round robin. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add those 3 servers in Dallas to the Dallas pool. And then again, at the end of every page, like every one of our wizards, it asks for the extensible attribute. So I'm going to put in the Dallas one. And then again, with the magic of video editing, I'm going to put the Paris one in there. And then the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up an LBDN, the load balance domain name. This is the name that's in the query that we're getting that we're going to respond to. So I'm just doing www, and this is my internal domain. Again, you know, load balancing methods here as well. So global availability, round robin, topology. For this one, I'm also just going to use global availability. And I'm not going to set any persistence, but you could set that here if you wanted to. Now we're going to select which records we're going to expect to receive. So for my example, I'm doing A, Quad A, and CNAME. And then I'm going to select the DNS zone that this is associated with. And then I'm going to select both those pools, because those are the 2 pools that I want to load balance between. And I'm not going to do an extensible attribute here since it's all in one location. So as soon as I make the change, I hit the restart button, like most people are pretty familiar with in Infoblox world. And then once it restarts, I'm going to be left with something that looks like this. And this is what a base configuration would look like. I've got my 3 servers in the Dallas pool that are represented there, and they're green, and the green checkboxes mean the health is good. And I have the same in the pool in Paris. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a topology rule set. So now I'm going to say that for a certain subnet, I want it to go to the Dallas pool, and for everything else, I'm going to have it go to the Paris pool. So I'm going to go here, and I'm going to select the extensible attribute rule. Sorry, actually, for this one, I'm doing the subnet one, I guess. But you could select subnet, you could select geolocation, or you could select extensible attributes. So for here, I'm doing the subnet. And I'm saying if you're in this certain network, then you go to the Dallas pool. And then if you're in some other network, then you get the other pool. Also notice at the bottom it says default destination if none of the above rules match. That's basically the catch-all. So if I didn't have the catch-all for the Dallas pool in there, I could select it there and then it would hit it. And then lastly, I'm going to modify my my LBDN, and I'm going to switch the load balancing method, and I'm going to switch this to topology. Then I'm going to select that topology rule set, and I'm going to hit save and close. Now, Bob, I think that's the end of the video. Is it? I think that's the end of it. Now, the one thing I'm going to point out that I don't have on here, this is a special, you guys are special today, is there's a button right here. And see, it says Test LBDN. This is kind of neat because once I set everything up, I could click that Test LBDN button, and it would ask me what source IP do I want to have the query come from, and what name am I using, and which record type. And then you can put in the source IP of a geolocation, or in the case of what I just used, one of the subnets. And then you'll see based on the response you get, if it's getting load balance right, if it's going to where you expect it to go to. I mentioned that I used to work at one of the big load balancing companies, and they don't have any of this kind of functionality, right? They don't have the visualizer, and they don't have the ability to test it and to determine where things are going very easily. It's not very intuitive to be able to use. You know what I mean?
Hey, and Scott, when you were at the other load balancer, what would it take to actually test it? I mean, if you were at another, say you were doing a site implementation.
You'd have to set up a client in that network and keep changing the client's IP to different networks to be able to test it, assuming that you can route to it, right? You'd have to directly plug into it. But if you directly plug into it, that means you're taking it off the network. And if you're taking it off the network, you're taking it out of production. The nice thing about this is that you can just enable this on your members. And we actually had a question. One of the Q&A questions was around DTC licensing, right? You license it on the members that are going to be responding to these queries. You don't have to license it for every member. If a member isn't going to be getting queries for this zone, then you don't need to license it. So essentially it goes by whichever members are part of a name server group that are authoritative for that zone. The caveat there is that also includes if you're using your grid master or your grid master candidate as a hidden master or a stealth primary, then you would have to license that as well. Just something to keep in mind.
Yeah, I think the other thing that's really interesting about this is how simple really the UI is, right? I mean, you really get a good graphical sense of everything that you have for your LBDN, right?
Yeah, especially the reporting part of it, right? Because in the reporting, you can see the health of the applications, and like you mentioned earlier, you can see patterns and trends of where things have been going as well.
All right, Scott. So that's really good. Appreciate that. Well, why don't we go ahead now and just take a moment and share some case studies that we've had. Scott, you're particularly familiar with this one, the Hershey company. I think everybody knows Hershey. They've been around for almost 125 years. They have nearly 15,000 people worldwide. Scott, you're familiar with this one. Can you walk us through Hershey?
Yeah, I like the Hershey case story. It's a pretty sweet one. They were you like that? They were looking to implement new DNS and DHCP corporate wide. Jason Seeger, who's the network architect manager there, said he selected Infoblox in part because he wanted both an integrated DDI and GSLB solution. A few other things he had commented about was that he wanted somebody with at least a 50% market share. He wanted ease of use, ease of upgrades, and a DDI vendor that integrated both IPAM and GSLB. He said he also chose Infoblox because he needed to be able to provide DR services for his applications, as well as being able to protect them from DDoS and exfiltration attacks. There was kind of a nice quote he wrote that I like to read. When the project was over, he was quoted as saying, "The team wasn't looking forward to a major change. Obviously, there are always concerns around a big implementation. But we used Infoblox professional services, and they had a good plan for the cutover, so we were all very confident. The cutover went extremely well, and everybody was pleased with the transition across the board. When the migration was complete and Infoblox was working without a problem, everyone from our senior IS leadership all the way down was extremely happy, and everyone felt we had made the right decision in choosing Infoblox."
Yeah, that's a great story, Scott. In fact, the Hershey company case study is actually out on the Infoblox website. And so if you'd like to look into that a little more detail, just go to infoblox.com and search for Hershey, and you can download that pretty quickly. So thanks for sharing that one, Scott. There's another one. We have a customer that's a global law firm. We have a great story around this. They have 11 offices worldwide in the US, in Europe, and in Asia Pacific, just about 2,400 employees. And, some of the challenges they found, they were having non-policy compliant site visits. They were having internal threats coming through. They had to do disaster recovery, and of course, as I just mentioned, across geodiverse servers. The load balancing solution that they had was very expensive. It was complicated. It required a lot of extra hardware, and they had to do these DNS tricks to really deliver load balancing and dynamically change IP addresses, and they didn't have zone or domain or subdomain management, and those were all key pain points. But they chose DTC, and in doing so, it increased their stability. They were able to reduce the trouble tickets that moved between the subnets. From a security standpoint, they eliminated the problems of support remotely connecting to the wrong client due to stale DNS records. They were also able to improve their efficiency because they used the script to create the DTC records, which was pretty substantial in terms of labor savings. And then, of course, they were able to use an API to automate the IP assignment and DNS record creation. And it really improved their visibility. At the end of the day, their manager of network infrastructure said, DTC is easy to set up and use. The UI is simple and elegant. I think you got a sense of that actually on one of the in the demo. But the API makes it fast to automate record creation for virtual servers. It's a huge time saver. And our existing ADC was expensive, complicated, required additional hardware. But DTC delivered all the services we needed for less than the maintenance cost of our existing solution. And that's something that I think is really a telling quote. So Scott, as we take a look, for those that are on the call, again, just to summarize, why would we use DNS traffic control? I think it comes down to visibility, right? Being able to see all your global LBDNs, the pools, the servers, the cyber intelligence that you mentioned, the compliance, the real-time reporting that we alluded to. Also, Scott, you mentioned things around reliability, so app uptime and performance, the load balancing so that we can intelligently direct traffic to the optimal server. Scott, you mentioned the grid integration with the DNS and GSLB server settings managed through that UI that's really easy. It doesn't require any special programming. The server validation as well to make sure that those server paths are clear before you send traffic, and of course the scalability to support those high volumes through CSV. And then, of course, automation, Scott, you mentioned that as well, automatically creating topologies. We have those three areas, IP subnet, GeoIP, and extensible attributes, the meta tags, metadata that we can define, as you saw in the demo. And then the API automation. Scott, you did a great API automation video just not too long ago, and that also is out on infoblox.com. And also in the YouTube Infoblox channel. And then, of course, the Grid software updates is really fast and easy to update software. And then, of course, our ecosystem. I think, Scott, right, the bottom line is this. You touched on it. It's 90% of the functionality at about 20% of the cost. And there's also, the advantage of the license options. We have perpetual options, but of course there's subscription. If you do a subscription, there's a lower initial cash outlay. It includes the upgrades, so that's an advantage. And you can move that between physical, virtual appliances in the cloud. And of course, if you're a growing organization, you can scale up and you can also upgrade as well. Scott, if somebody wanted to try Infoblox, can you talk to us about how easy that is?
Yeah, so the beauty is that every Infoblox member has the ability to enable a 60-day license for pretty much everything, assuming it hasn't been enabled on a device before. So if we've got a Grid member that's serving DNS and DHCP, it's really just running the set temp _ license command. selecting DNS Traffic Controller, and it's going to license it full featured for 60 days. At the end of the 60 days, the license will expire and it'll just stop working, but the member will just keep humming along as it's been. Or then, hopefully before the 60 days, then you purchase the license, you apply the permanent license to what you've got, and everything that's set up continues to run as is.
And what about those that are still considering Infoblox? They're not yet customers.
Yeah, so contact your sales team or sales@infoblox.com, and we can help you get a hold of somebody to come out and speak with you around it, and be able to help walk you through the architecture and how to license it and how to configure it and all the different functionality.
Yeah, and so just as a recap, there are some next steps. As we've mentioned kind of throughout this webinar today, there are a lot of great resources out on infoblox.com. There's data sheets, there's white papers, there's solution notes, there's videos, etc. And so there's lots there. In addition to that, we're glad to talk about your load balancing needs. Perhaps you'd like to talk to a system engineer and actually have a unique use case. You want to see that worked out in the lab, we can do that as well. You can get a cost-benefit analysis, that's possible. And if you have any other questions, of course, we have our number, and you can reach out to us at info@infoblox.com. And so those are just some other resources that are available to you. Scott, I think we've had some questions. Let's jump to that. We just have a few minutes left. So I think Matt asked the question, Windows clients sometimes do DNS caching that ignores the TTL supplied by DNS, and sometimes other products do too. Do we have an answer? And then he clarified by saying, if the client ignores TTL and hangs on to the IP, won't it fail over when DTC changes the IP address? Any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, that's a little bit of a tough one, because we're always kind of handcuffed by what Windows is doing and what applications are doing. But most people, we set the TTL low enough, and generally most applications generally observe it.
Okay. Any other questions that anyone has? Please go ahead and type that into the QA window.
We've also had a couple comments in our chat. So, one or two people had asked if we were going to send the presentations out. And Bob, you'll be doing that, correct?
Yeah, we'll send you a PDF copy of our presentation. There'll also be that'll be in the email along with the recording, so you can pass that on as needed. And then we're also sending you that report from IDC that might help shed some light on DTC as well.
And we've also had some comments around, somebody said that they really are glad we added the SRV functionality in 8.3. Sounds like it solved some voice over IP problems for them. So that's good to know. And we're gonna have some more webinars coming up in the new year, and we hope everybody has a fantastic holidays and a safe new year.
Yeah, I think Sharath had one other question around DTC and where it needs to be licensed for internal DNS.
Yeah, so that's a good conversation to have with your account team and your SE. Again, it depends on the architecture of the zones and which members are authoritative for the zones, because you're going to have to license it on all the members that are authoritative, which most people generally do it through a name server group. So you would license all the members that are part of that name server group.
I think there was one other question around known issues about using DTC and DNSSEC.
Yeah, another conversation to probably have with your account team and SE, but yeah, it certainly supports DNSSEC. DNSSEC is a big part of most customers' external facing DNS. So it certainly does work with DNSSEC. And for those that have ever used DNSSEC in our box, it's one click in a zone to sign it and re-sign it when you make changes to it. So it's pretty easy to use.
All right, well, Scott, thanks again for your expertise today, and thank you everyone for joining us for today's DTC Tech Demo webinar. As Scott mentioned, we will be having additional monthly webinars as we look forward into 2019. In the meantime, have a wonderful holiday with your family. Thanks again for joining us, and we look forward to chatting with you again soon. As for now, this concludes our presentation. Have a great day.